Hi, my name is Angela, and I donated a kidney to my uncle over 25 years ago. I decided to donate because I wanted my uncle to live. I wanted to see him healthy again. I wanted him to enjoy the fullness of life that he had already enjoyed before his kidney disease. When I was learning about living kidney donation and doing my own research, my biggest concern was this donation going to have a negative impact on my own health? At the time, I was only 36 years old, and so I was very young. But after listening to the staff and doing my own research, I realized that the medical staff were going to take me through an entire battery of tests. And if they saw anything that was not quite right or anything that would not lead me to be the best donor for my uncle, they were not going to allow me to do that. And so once I learned that my own health was priority before the donation, that made me feel right at ease. There were some financial aspects to donating that I had to concern myself with. First, time off from work. I was on a job that I had not been on for even a year. And so I didn't have enough time to take off the full 6 weeks. But the good thing about it was, even back in 1999, I had a job where I worked from home. I traveled a lot, but I worked from home. And so I was able to negotiate with my supervisor the ability to use up all my leave time, which was only about 3 weeks. And then I could work from home the rest of the remaining recovery period, the remaining 3 weeks. And I was just blessed that way that I had a manager who was able to allow me to do that. And I did work. I performed all of my duties. So that eased my mind when I was able to negotiate that with my supervisor. Because I was insured, I wasn't necessarily worried about insurance, but they didn't have to bill my insurance. They were able to bill it through my uncle's insurance. So that wasn't as much of a concern to me. My uncle was my mother's youngest brother. And when it was decided that I was cleared to become an organ donor, my mother made it clear that I had to have my recovery period in her home. She and my uncle lived in the same small town. And so she wanted to make sure that I recovered fully, and she wanted to make sure that I was taken care of. And more importantly, I followed all of the orders from the doctors. And so my full 6 weeks, I moved into my mother's home, which was about 75 miles away from where I lived. But that's what I had to do, she told me. And so we had friends and relatives who supported my mom with my care. The pain was the most excruciating pain I had ever experienced in my life right after surgery. And I'm a mother, so I've given birth to one child, but this was painful. But it again, I took it easy. I gradually increased my activity as the doctors told me to increase my activity. I didn't break the rules, but I was able to recover with no problems at all. And my mother converted my old bedroom at her home into my healing center. So, till this day, 25 years later, on the door of that bedroom is a little plaque that they had engraved, and it says the Healing Center. And so my recovery went great. And I went back to work the early part of January. And the hardest thing that I had to adjust to was to not do all of the things I had done pre surgery. So, because I traveled a lot and I hadn't traveled for 6 weeks, I was flying on an airplane probably 10 weeks after surgery. And so I had to learn that I couldn't lift suitcases the way I used to lift suitcases. And so I adapted. I didn't force my body to do anything that it was telling me it didn't want to do, or I really needed more time for my body to heal in terms of lifting luggage, because that was the primary thing I had to worry about, was getting on an airplane and flying to my work locations when I was not working at home. But I learned the lessons fairly quickly, and so the pain subsided. Um, Once I learned to follow my body. What I learned about myself after the kidney transplant surgery was that I had the ability to show love in a really big way to my family. I had watched my mom and her brothers, who were all very close, interact throughout my whole life. And I'm quite sure they had disagreements at some point, but I never saw them. And they just loved each other and supported each other. And so when the time came, I had good role models to follow. And so I was needed. So I stepped up and I helped. And I helped in a big way, I think. But what I learned about other people was that in the small town where my uncle and my mom lived and where I grew up, they didn't believe in living organ donation. In 1999, they had not heard of living organ donation, most people. And so, therefore, they felt like this was some experimental surgery that was going to do some permanent damage to me, and how weird it was for me to give my uncle a kidney and for him to then live a regular life after that. That was just unheard of. And so we did it. And for every time my uncle walked into his bank to go to work, he was living proof that organ donation was real and it's not experimental. And for every time I visited my hometown and attended a function or attended church, then people could see that you can actually give a kidney and you can actually live a full life like a regular person. And 25 years later, I am still going back to my hometown and for different events and affairs and visiting my family. And they can see that 25 years later, I'm still living my full life with no negative repercussions from the transplant surgery. And the other thing that I learned in the process is that I needed to educate, not just by my presence in my hometown. I needed to educate others so that they would at least know it's not experimental. It's not some foreign thing that only certain people get to do. Living donation is something that anyone can do if you're willing. If you educate yourself and you're willing to do it, it can be done. And so, since the kidney transplant surgery for over 25 years, and I've lived in 5 states, but I have volunteered and I have been a part of educating people in some way, shape, or form for 25 years about the benefits of, number one, being an organ donor, but number two, that you can be a living organ donor, and I'm living proof of that. And so that's what I've learned, and that's what I've tried to teach to others. If I had the chance to do this again, I'd do it all the same in terms of making the decision, going through the testing, going through the surgery. And we know the decision to recuperate at my mother's house was a non negotiable in her mind. So that would have stayed the same. I think the one thing that I would do differently is I probably would make it a big news story, because in 1999, I guess it was something that wasn't heard of. So I didn't want to make a big deal about it because I didn't want the negative energy coming our way. But now that I know 25 years later how important it is to promote living organ donation, I probably would have been happy to have a news story done on myself and my uncle. I probably would have begged for a follow up story every year on our anniversary just to raise awareness. In a small town or a place where people don't get to see living donation all the time. That's what I think I would do differently. Make it a big deal in the news. Best advice I could give someone who's considering being a living organ donor is the same thing I've said for the last 25 years. Do your own reading, do your own research. There are very reliable resources out there, way more resources out there to educate you than there were in 1999. Um, and then once you make the decision and you go through the process, if that's what you choose to do, don't take your own health for granted. Know that because you've given life to someone else, you still have to cherish the life and the body that you have with you now. And so that's the advice I've been giving to people for 25 years. If I encountered someone who was not comfortable with allowing another person to donate a kidney to them, I think I would say, let my life be an example of how a donor can live a full life post transplant. Um, and I actually had that to happen. Uh, I randomly was traveling in New Orleans and decided to buy dinner. It was one of those big buffets. And so I purchased dinner for the person behind me in line. And it was a group of three people. And after I paid for the person behind me their dinner, they said, "You have to come and eat with us." And I said, "No, no, no. I just, wanted to do that." And they said, "No, you have to come and eat with us." So I sat at the table with these three random people, only to find out that one of the guys, a young guy, he was probably in his 30s, um, was on dialysis and needed a kidney transplant. And at that moment, I knew that God must have put it in me to be able to offer dinner to a stranger. And so I proceeded to talk about living donation over dinner. And the guy who needed the kidney transplant said no, he didn't want any member of his family to endanger their health. And I couldn't get through to him. And so for the remainder of the dinner, I just started talking about my travels, talking about my family, all the fun things I've done. And every now and then I said, "And I did all of this post transplant." And we talk a little bit more about this and that and the fun things that I had been doing. And I said to him, "And this can be done by a person who's given a kidney to someone." And so he just looked at me and laughed, because every time we talk about something or I get into, the conversation that they were in, I just reminded him that 15 years post transplant, I'm still doing all the things that I would have done with two kidneys, but I'm doing it with one kidney. And he needed to open his mind to that. I also gave him my business card and offered to talk to any of his relatives, just have them call me and I'll let them know and tell them about how just take care of yourself and you can live a full life. So I've actually had that happen before. But I think that's the one thing, the only thing that I would say to them is 25 years after transplant, I'm still here. I've never experienced any negative repercussions from the surgery, and I'm still living my life as if I had two kidneys.